Welcome to the Data Strategy Show. My name's Samir Sharma and I'll be your host today. My guest on today's show is Lori Silverman. Lori is the founder and CEO of Partners for Progress. Over the last 30 years, Lori has been helping enterprises across 25 industries strategize about their future and navigate through messy and complex change. She's a pioneer in the field of business storytelling and has authored 3 best-selling books on the subject. She is also known for her work in collaborative data-informed decision-making, and that's what she calls data literacy too. She's a keynote speaker at more than over 80 events throughout the world, and Lori's inspired thousands of people to take action. She's an adjunct professor in the Industrial and Organizational Psychology Master's Program at Golden Gate University. You can follow her on LinkedIn, as well as listen to her show, Level Up with Lori. Don't forget to subscribe to the Data Strategy Show and enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Lori, to the Data Strategy Show. It's lovely to have you here. Lori, I would love to, you and I have spoken a lot. We've known each other for a while now. We connected via LinkedIn. And I love some of the LinkedIn Live programs you have. But what I'd really like to do and start off with is, who's Lori? A little bit about yourself. And from 30,000 feet, what's the force behind you, and what are you passionate about?
That's a really good question in terms of what's the force behind me. Actually, that came to me last summer. I was recording a videotape for a colleague of mine, and he wanted me to review my entire career. And I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that what I've done 3 times since age 30, and I'm not age 30 anymore, as you can see. But what I've done 3 times in my career, for lack of a better term, is I've taken topics or subjects or areas that Google Trends has no recognition about, and over a period of usually a decade, brought those topics and conversations into the mainstream.
Okay.
So I'm doing it now for the 3rd time with what I'm affectionately calling data literacy 2.0. And
okay.
For me, you use the word passion, and I'm going to distinguish between passion and legacy, because for me, this is a calling. I've been pushed and compelled to do this. So that's a force that's really different than having an interest or a passion and pursuing it as a business. It's inside my belly. It's like it's pulling me forward. And so 2020 was about year 5 of a 10-year plan. I can't tell you yet if COVID has accelerated that, meaning like I'm in year 8. I don't think so. I think it's actually caused a bit of a hiccup. But what it has done is it's given me the opportunity to interface with so many people on LinkedIn and to do the LinkedIn Live show, right? To start to bring some provocative, new, interesting ideas to the surface.
Sure.
Right? Because when I do this, what always strikes me, and I think it's easy, but it's not easy, is that every time I bring a new subject forward, it requires a significant shift in mindset and in paradigm within businesses. And that takes a long time to kind of take hold. So you have to find those people who some folks call early adopters. I just think to me that they're the people like you and others who go, oh yeah, so that makes perfect sense. Why didn't I think of that?
Great. Listen, there's so many things you just mentioned there, and I'm glad I used the word force, because I think that opened up a huge amount there, which is fantastic. So, I think for the listeners and for what you've just mentioned around data literacy 2.0, the whole mindset paradigm shift in business, I think that, your 10-year plan, and I saw something on LinkedIn the other day which said, I bought a 2020 diary. That sucked, so it's quite funny. But back to data literacy. This is a topic, a conversation piece, a trend that has been buzzing for a number of years now. And I know you say that you sort of hit the trends way early on in that bell curve and in the early adoption phase. What's your angle been around data literacy from the inception, and how are you finding where the narrative is going now in terms of data literacy?
Well, with the inception of data literacy, if you look into the literature, comes from a couple of different sources. There are a few folks who are attached to MIT, the Open Data Institute, and other places who started about 2015, 2016 to posit a definition of data literacy. But the definition they use is typically something like the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data.
Sure. That's the general one I've heard.
That's the general one, but it's hugely problematic. It's hugely problematic, and there's several problems with it. Number one is that it focuses on the individual and their ability to be data literate.
Yep.
And it does. So the first challenge is it doesn't focus on the organization. And what people don't realize is just because I teach you how to become more savvy with data. And I did this years ago. I mean, we would put people through 3 weeks of statistical training.
Wow. Wow.
And what
that
we
would
realized,
be a mindset blowout for me.
Well, it was for me too, But what we realized is it didn't shift organizations. Right. So there's an underlying assumption that doesn't prove to be true. Just because I train 1,000 people in something doesn't mean the organization's competence in that will shift. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is this definition is based on a what people are calling the fourth industrial revolution, which if you talk to a futurist, so I'm a strategist and a futurist, we that term doesn't resonate with us. It's a kind of, I want to say, well, all terms are man-made, but it's a term that was fabricated to actually help the technology industry. And I mean, it comes out of the World Economic Forum, but they have an agenda that they are trying to play out. If you talk to a futurist would say to you, wait a minute, we're at the tail end of the knowledge economy, and we started in about the 1950s with the tail beginning of the experience economy. So the way that I frame it for people is we're not in the fourth industrial revolution. Today is all about enhancing the consumer's experience or enhancing the human experience. Now, where I as an individual might need to become data literate is that's kind of like the last bastion of the knowledge economy. Right. That, we have all these different literacies we need to have, and I need to know how to understand data in my daily life and also in my work life. But if you look at the real why behind this, it's about enhancing organizations and making more intelligent organizations.
Yep.
Okay. So then what that starts, and then if I use one more piece off the definition, I don't ever want people to argue with data. If we're arguing with data, what it's suggesting to me is that we don't understand brain research. So the human brain actually doesn't like data. It doesn't. I did a whole LinkedIn live show with my colleague on this. It wants to dismiss it because the human brain is all about experience and story and true human story. So I say to people, if you're arguing about the data, then you haven't gone far enough in your use of the data to get to the insight and storifying the insight. But that gets into a whole different conversation.
Well, you've just brought it up. So it's something that is really intriguing for me. What you've said, you've on 3 levels. If I just cover, you talked about individual literacy versus the organization literacy. You're an organizational psychologist, and where that sort of underpins an organization, how do you mobilize literacy for an organization, as opposed, to bring those people marching forward with that organization and help. Because if as an organization you're saying there's got to be, and maybe this isn't the way that you're framing it, but this whole collective thinking, I don't think that's healthy for an organization. So how do you then permeate literacy into an organization at that level? How does that work?
Well, we first have to shift the conversation, because the biggest paradigm that has to shift is it's not about the data. If we keep focusing on the data, we're not going to see successes. And that's why we've seen study after study after study that tells us we're having tremendous difficulty, because the way organizations function is based on decisions. We make hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions a day in organizations. And we have got to start to talk about how do we decision in organizations, not how do we use the data. If we continue on with this conversation, we're going to stay, it's literally, we're doing this.
I get you. I understand. And so what you're saying is that you've got data on one side, data by itself is nothing.
Correct. That's correct.
You can get, bringing it together with different areas, uncovering insights or new ideas or innovation. But by itself, it doesn't mean anything. So I get that point. And the idea of supporting the decisioning culture, absolutely. But, I agree 100% with you there in terms of that drive. But I think it's, for me, what are the practical ways that we as me as a data professional, I'm a data strategist, you're a business strategist. Maybe I should call myself a business strategist. I don't know. But, how do you cut against the grain of a literacy movement that is talking about arguing, but you moving that narrative to the organizational mindset? That's the thing that I'm trying to get to grips with here.
Well, that's what I've been working on since 2015, 2016. It's educating people.
Right.
And people have to be ready to hear the message. So what I've learned in the last 5 years is there are more and more and more people, because sometimes you have to fail at something in order to realize it's the wrong paradigm.
Of course.
And so that's what happens in business. And because we're having all these failures, people are saying, well, what else is out there? Now, what they've chosen to embrace instead, unfortunately, is they've chosen to say it's the human who's the problem. And they say it's the human who's the problem. Oh, the data scientist doesn't know how to sell, or the business doesn't know how to talk and relay their queries to the data folks. I mean, they're saying it's a people issue, when in fact what I know from early on in my career is that, people are good people. They never want to do anything wrong. It's the systems and processes we have in the organization that are being brought in today, and primarily by tech companies, that are causing this issue to be much more difficult. So in 2019, I called the leaders, C-suite leaders, in a variety of different tech companies who have applications for data visualization, applications for bringing forward enterprise data management, data marketplaces, you name it, right? And these are people I've connected to on LinkedIn. And I said to them, I'm confused because here's this kind of shift I'm trying to make, and I'm realizing it's a real battle. And the number one issue I heard, and they all said to me, don't tell other people this is like a secret, but it was a consistent theme. So I'm not going to release anyone's names. And these are people, by the way, all around the world. Is they said, we can't figure out how to make money off of decisioning. We can't codify it into an application or software program, because what you realize over here on the decisioning side is that human reasoning is absolutely critical, and you can't take the human out of the equation. Over here on the data side, I can try to take the human out of the equation, and I can sell the heck out of these software applications, but I can't do it over here. And so it's all about the hype, and it's all about the money. And so that's, until you have people who are savvy enough inside of organizations who just say enough is enough is enough. And that usually doesn't start with big organizations. It usually starts with smaller organizations who have the ability to be nimble enough to kind of shift to this fairly quickly, and start to do a replacement. But, when you're dealing with tens of thousands of people, you got a lot of folks you got to kind of help.
Corral and move.
In their mind.
Yeah.
But, is it possible? I mean, yes, because I've done it. I mean, I have successes early on in my career where we transformed huge organizations. It took us, it might take us between 18 months and a couple years, but it was because we had savvy enough business leaders who just said, how do we embed this into the DNA of the enterprise?
So I, for me, I think you've touched something which is quite deep in terms of, one, the decisioning, two, the cultural aspects, three, the education piece. But, off the back of what you said, I've seen projects, programs of work that have not been able to shift a mindset or cultural practice even within 2 to 5 years, and even to the point where people are being given, say for example, a data product that's made for them, and they can see, oh yeah, that looks lovely, and then but I think it's that whole decisioning piece which I'm also sort of countering as well. I did a post, I think, today probably, on, I'm so fed up of data culture. I don't even think that exists. I have no idea where that came from. But there is one thing that I realized thinking back in my mind. We had a practice called decision sciences.
Yes.
Which was a very long time. It's not a new concept. It's been around for, 25, 30 years or maybe longer. Where did that go? What happened to decision sciences? What did it fall out of favor?
Well, I'm actually more a kindred spirit today of what is being called decision intelligence. And decision intelligence, if you talk to Cassie Koscroft at Google, and she's written about it. I mean, the person who brought this concept forward is a woman by the name of Lori Pratt, who has a book called Link. I just did a LinkedIn live show with her 2 weeks ago on this topic. And she started about 8 years ago. So her background is she has a PhD in computer science, and she was a pioneer in AI, machine learning, and so on. So she started to introduce decision intelligence. Cassie Koscroft at Google made a shift in her job title. She went from being the chief data scientist to the chief decision scientist.
That's right,
Right? But what she says is, this is a combination of 3 disciplines. It's a combination of the data science discipline, the social sciences discipline, and the management science discipline. What I've been saying to Lorian, because that's where my conversations have been, is you're missing the psychological sciences. Right. And they are as critical, so that piece needs to get added to this. And this is an unfolding piece, by the way. I mean, this is not like, all of us, the way that we work is through crowdsourcing. It's how do we get the ideas and how do we talk to people about it? But the challenge we have is that when I talk about culture, I don't put the word data or decision in front of it. I just say, what's the culture needed to support embedding in data into decision making to inform decisions. Not to drive decisions, but more to enable decisions or to facilitate decisions. And when you do that, then you have to step back. Now you have to come at it from an organizational change perspective. And the first thing that I tell people to do, and no one really talks about this, is what's the vision story? What's the co-created vision story? A true story in the organization about what done is going to look like. So I want, a main character, and I want, what's the day in a life or a month in a life of that person going to look like when this organization shift is truly in place and embedded in the organization itself. And then you can shop that throughout the organization to say, hey, is this something that might interest you? Is it something you might be willing to work on? People will add to it. They'll delete from it and other things. What's happening is everybody else is starting with projects. They start with a project. And, we have to do a demonstration project. We have to show that there's, value. That's in a more traditional way of trying to do change. And what we know is it almost never works. So if you go to the change literature, it doesn't work at all.
I agree.
Right? So, but if you have this, the story of here's what we're trying to achieve together. So first of all, now you're engaging the whole of the human brain, because that story is the one form of narrative that allows people to do two things. One is to shift their thinking very rapidly at the unconscious level, and second, to be moved to action.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll have people saying, well, how do we do that? What does that mean? What does that look like to my area of the business and so on? But then what you can do is what we call, in my vernacular, an organizational architecture assessment.
Right.
I call it a change impact assessment against the vision
Mm-hmm.
of this, where we want to be.
And where is so where is that where you want to be? Is that 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40,
Whatever,
100
no.
years?
When you don't put there's no
Oh, there's no time bound. Okay.
No, it's not
Okay.
time bound. Is this the type of organization we're trying to create through embedding data into our decisioning process in a way that it enables us to do things differently.
Right. So you're starting with a blank slate. You're starting with you're starting with the why and that directional challenge to them, or is it the purpose? I mean,
So I'm going back to, there is a man by the name of David Gleicher, and in the 1950s, he put together a change equation. And he said there are three things that have to happen for change to be evoked. And it's a multiplicative equation. So all three have to be present all the time. The first is dissatisfaction with the status quo. The second is the vision of the change.
Right.
The third is first steps.
Okay.
Now, you could start with dissatisfaction of the status quo, right, and get people really disgruntled. What I do is I say these two steps here are iterative. They're very iterative. If I don't know what we're trying to achieve, especially if you start to think about personality temperament, where 75% of the population's very concrete, I need to see it in order for it to exist. I can't have a conceptual conversation.
Sure.
Then if I start with this story and I say, here's what concrete could look like. Is this attractive to you? Is it desirable to you? Does it compel you to want it? Then I can go back because in this story are going to be these dissatisfiers. Because that's the way a co-created vision story is written. Is it's written between, here's the opportunity and here's the issue or conflict it overcomes. Here's the opportunity, here's what it overcomes. Here's the opportunity, here's what it overcomes. It's a bit different than a traditional story structure. But when I have that, then people can say, oh, this problem might not exist.
Sure.
We could have this.
Yeah.
And so these two pieces start to work together, because what you have to do is imagine, do you ski at all? Do you go like
I used to. I got a bad knee now, so.
Oh yeah.
No more skiing for me.
So what was like your favorite place to go? Was it like in Switzerland or someplace else that you would go?
A place in France called Chamonix.
Oh, Chamonix! I've actually been there, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Beautiful
place.
If you
think about, you're right, beautiful place. If you think about the mountains and you think about people who are mountain climbers, what they'll tell you is, it's the last 20 feet that are really hard.
Yes.
Because what I'm doing is I'm looking down, I'm not looking up. Right? And something has to allow me to get to the top of the mountain. When I get to the top of the mountain, I can see a 360 degree. Like if you took the chairlift up to the top, right?
Yeah.
I can see a view that's amazing. So these two pieces within a story together allow us to get to this last 20 or so meters, right? For people to get to the top. But here's the dilemma we have. When you start on a journey, people also have to walk down. And walking down, if you've ever walked down a mountain, I have.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Walk it.
It's
I'm not talking
fun.
skiing it. It's not fun. And the end, it's like when people go to the Grand Canyon and they walk into the Grand Canyon, they oftentimes can't get out because
I'm not
they hurt
surprised.
so badly. They can't walk the next day. And
Yeah.
so you have to realize that in this change journey, it's exhausting to get to the top and say, yes, we want it, is as exhausting to start the journey coming down. And that becomes then, that's why we have to do an analysis of the organization. And some people have said to me, well, isn't this what enterprise data architects or enterprise data management is supposed to do. Isn't your OA assessment what an EA assessment is? And I'm like, no, because from an enterprise data management perspective, they're focused primarily on the architecture around technology, right?
Yep.
I'm interested in the architecture around the totality of the enterprise, the totality of it. And if I start to take this vision and butt it up against each of the pieces and say, if we do this, what does that imply to this? And what does that imply to this? And what does that imply to this? And what does that imply to this or this or this? Then we start to see, oh my gosh, look at how many things need to shift in the enterprise in order for this to work. So now let me come back to your question. Why is it a surprise that these projectized pieces don't work?
Yep.
What are they butting up against? They're butting up against all the things we'd see in an assessment.
Sure.
Only we're not shifting those pieces.
Yeah. No. There are some really good snippets in there. I think the last bit for me was around the systems and processes.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important. I'll walk into organizations, and the first thing I typically do, I mean, I'm not doing an org assessment, even though I do come from an organizational psychology background myself, which, not many people know that, but, it's interesting. And when you talk about co-creation and visioning and so on, I did that so many years ago. I have to brush up on my skills again, but those kind of things evoke a lot of emotions in me, because I've done that with governments, I've done that with, prime ministers and so on. But systems and processes was always the one thing, regardless of where you are in terms of whether you're a corporate, whether you're public sector, whether you're a charity and so on. I find that those things are continuously lacking in terms of how we do stuff, why we're actually doing it, how do we underpin an organization. And for me, you can have the best and greatest of values for an organization, but if you don't have the bedrock, which are the processes of when I do something, how am I going to underpin my decisioning on that if it's faulty?
Well, therein lies the largest question today, because in order for this work to be successful, we have to go back to the fundamentals, and the fundamentals is the flow of work through an organization. That is the fundamentals.
Absolutely.
The problem is that when new types of technology are brought in, they bring in their own nomenclature and their own way of doing things, and they're forms oriented most times, and reports oriented, and they're not workflow oriented. So now the workflow gets disaggregated, it gets cut up into pieces, and so you have business analysts who are saying, what about the flow of the work, folks? Because the decisioning process, I mean, if you, in the most ideal of worlds, and this is what the work that I've done, you can take the flow of business processes in an organization. You can attach decisions to them. You can attach data to them. You can attach a lot of different things. That makes it simple, because then I can look at a work group and I can say, here's your part of this overall workflow. Here are the decisions that you own. Here's the data that you own. So now let's come back to one of the other issues that we have. People talk about data democratization. The heck with data democratization. The real issue for people is, am I allowed within my own scheme of work to make the decisions that I need to make? And do you even, it's not, do you allow me access to the data? Because you can give me access to the data, you might not allow me to make the decision.
Exactly. Or I could do whatever I want with it, but I wouldn't have a clue, because one, I don't know what it's telling me, I don't know how to use it, I don't know what it's going to facilitate. But I get you, and I think that's, data democratization is in a way, a bit of a fallacy for the way that it's couched. To say, and I think this is the problem that's happened, and I believe this is probably why the whole data literacy movement has been exacerbated, because many people decided that let's just give everybody the data and off they go, but what they do with it, nobody knows.
Well, but remember, this was because we want to sell self-service analytics.
Correct.
So what you and I are speaking about, I'll be honest with you, this is heretics, right?
Yes.
I mean, if there's someone from a tech company listening to this,
and there will be, no doubt.
And they will be. They're going to say, who are these people? And right? And let's get rid of them, because I've already had that. I've had that happen. People say to me, we need to silence your voice and quiet you. And I'm like, Well, first of all, let me tell you.
I don't think they could silence your voice, Lori.
Well, I'm in my 60s, so you try to do that to me, When you
Well,
get to be my
good.
age,
You're looking
right?
good for your age.
Right. Well, I tell even my students, some
Yeah.
of my students are in their 20s all the way up to their 50s. I
Yeah.
teach graduate classes. I tell them, and you need to have a voice. I wish somebody had told me that in my 20s. But my voice will not be silenced, and I don't want yours to be silenced either. But we have to start looking at, why are we doing this? What's the greater good? The greater good is we're trying to create intelligent organizations. And the two questions that business leaders are most concerned about, and I'm not even going to talk about finances here, but the two questions from a decisioning perspective they're the most concerned about is, outside of an innovation setting or an innovation context, are we making the right decisions?
Yep.
Are we making the right decisions
Yes.
for our business, for our consumers, for the social nature of our business? Are we making the right decisions? And what's the cost associated with making the wrong decision? Right? And then there's one other piece to that is, so we make the right decision. Do we ever fully implement it?
Yeah.
There's a cost to that too. And so these questions are what business leaders, they're not consciously thinking about them, but I'll tell you, if I go into a CEO's office and I try to have either of these two conversations, should I talk about whether or not you're literate in data, or should I talk about this decisioning piece? Which do you think a business leader is going to want to engage in a conversation with me about?
Yeah.
They're going to shoot me out of the office if I want to talk about this, but they'll talk to me about this all day long.
And I think I find myself agreeing with you a lot. The one thing that I see continuously is a narrative around, well, organizations are already making decisions. They've already been doing this for hundreds of years. And absolutely, you're right. They've been making a gut feel decision. They've been looking outside at the weather, and, we make 1,500, 2,000 decisions a day, without knowing. So, it's, I'm sure it's probably even more. But decisioning itself, I think, is an absolute, and I think that's why I like the word science off the back of it, because it absolutely is a science within itself to get it right, but to see it through and to keep embedding those principles among the organization. I don't have, it's one of the things where I continue to say to myself, even, when I remember doing some work in the Caribbean and working with the Prime Minister, one of the Prime Ministers there in the Caribbean, just to get the level of co-creation in terms of decision making that we were doing around policy and procedures and how they would enact those within Parliament, was an absolute, it was a travesty. It was just, sorry.
The first paper I ever wrote was in 1988, and it was how to do consensus decision making. And what we were doing at that time was flowcharting the decision making process.
Right.
Because I worked in C-suite teams, across major enterprises, and we would flow, how do we make different types of decisions? And then we would follow those flows. Where I am today, and I think that, I look back and I say, wow, I was really ahead of my time. I don't think I understood what I was doing with my colleagues, but it certainly drove the consulting work that we did when we worked with organizations, which allowed us to see through these transformations. Today, what I say to people is, you have to have a robust decisioning process or a framework in place. Now, for us, we call that making smarter decisions with data, and smarter is actually an acronym. And if we start to teach this to people in an organization at the very same time, we're starting to shift these systems and processes to support them in doing this decisioning, then the two pieces come together. And anyone can learn a simple framework for decisioning.
Oh,
we know
course.
They do it for, we've seen it happen if we're doing design thinking, people follow steps. We see it in problem solving. We see it in other types of innovation. I used to write workbooks years ago. I had a workbook, one on problem solving, continual improvement, standardization, and innovation. So now I'm saying, well, all of those have an umbrella decisioning process. There are steps that you can go through, but it has to be collaborative. And that's the other piece that's missing here.
Yes.
Is I don't necessarily have to teach everyone how to do analytics. I don't have to teach everyone how to do data visualization. I don't have to teach everyone. What I have to be able to teach people is, if you know this process, then what you have to ask yourself at the beginning is, who do we need to involve along the way?
Yeah.
Who do we need to involve? And that is not an analytic process.
No.
It's both a strategic thinking and an analytic process combined together. And so to me, this is important, to bring into organizations. And I've been teaching a methodology. Oh my gosh, I've been crowdsourcing a methodology since about 2016. I think that I'm feeling pretty good about it today in terms of the overall steps.
Yep.
Because you get enough feedback from thousands and thousands of people who've used it over time. And I think we have the robust framework where it allows people to make some adjustments and alterations along the way.
And are you going to publish that, or is that already out there?
Yeah, it's out there. We did in episode 10 of Level Up with Lori, my LinkedIn,
your LinkedIn
show.
Live.
We talked about it. I haven't. We haven't put out a white paper about it. And that's just me. I am happy to share with people like a simple worksheet that we've put together, but only because I believe that people need to learn it and not just follow it in a book. Now, I might decide differently later on. For my clients, we get much more specific, but we're modifying the methodology to suit them.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No. I totally understand. And it's one thing that I've seen over the last, say, two clients at the moment, both different industries, but both sort of mentally in the same stages, I would say, of thrusting data to the fore, wanting to create a solid foundation in terms of a base of good quality data and all the things that you'd expect in terms of data management principles. But on two occasions, I've asked the same question. Do you have the processes that you can back these things up with? And how do you make a decision based off those processes? And and simply what actions do those people need to take, or who's involved? And I think, it stumps them in terms of, oh no, well, we don't have, and I'll give you the example. One example is around customer experience. We talk about customer experience, internal, external. How does the customer feel? What's their behavior? What do we want them to do? What do we need to give them? What decisions do they need to make? So, co-creating that is quite a big endeavor. And when I was engaged by one of my clients, they said, we're getting an agency to do this, and they're going to ask the question, what data do you need? And I said, well, no, there's a huge amount of layers underneath that.
Yeah, well, it's not only a huge amount of layers, but let me add another example to what you said to talk about how complicated it could be. So I was working in one of the world's largest retailers, and I said to the business, what do you use as the business process flow framework? And they showed me, and they said, but it's not followed. I said, what do you mean? They said, go to IT. Go to IT. They go to IT, and they open up drawers that look like architectural drawers where you'd have architectural drawings. And they say, well, this is the flow of the business. And I said, but this doesn't match this, and this isn't flow.
Correct.
And so right there, and I said to them, okay, so when you're designing applications, when you're switching the website, because obviously for retailers, right?
Yes.
It's really huge.
Yeah.
Which of these are you using?
Oh, I bet I know which one.
Right. And it's like this one, I'm like, yeah, but this is the one the business is using to make decisions off of, and it's not attached to this.
Yeah.
And could we kind of go like this? And they're like, I said, otherwise, I'm going to tell you something right now. You're going to have data quality issues up to the wazoo, because it's just the way it is. But your piece says something else. It's not just about articulating the decisions. It's also about articulating, and this is where Lori and Pratt's work is, the mental models that are behind making those decisions that we hold to be true. Because if we can start to show on paper how we think causality works or how we think the different multiple variables
Are we talking
work.
about bias as well there? Are we just, I mean, are we talking about that, the unconscious bias, or is that not something that,
Well,
when you talk about mental models?
well, we all have biases.
Yeah.
And what bothers
Yeah.
me is that the conversation on decisioning almost always goes to, here are the 15 biases. Who the hell cares? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I probably couldn't even said that.
Yeah.
But it's, what I want you to do instead of talking about here are the biases that are happening is show me on paper how you all collectively think something works.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So
To make this decision, like what are, in a work process, we have variables, we have process and outcome variables. Show me how those interface with each other. Show me how they get to the outcome. That will reveal.
Yeah. How everyone. Yes.
And you can call those biases. I call them frames. In the strategic thinking literature, we call them frames. So because it's just a kinder word. It talks about our frames, and then we can say, well, we can test that. We can test it. Then we can start to put things into, AI and machine learning. They become our models that we start to say, is this the way the world really works? Right? But it gets us out of this conversation of saying, we can't use a true human story to talk about an insight that comes out of a data inquiry because the stories in and of themselves have biases attached to them. I'm like, everything in life does.
Yeah.
Everything in life does. Just get over it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a dark side to story. Well, there's a dark side to a lot of things right now. And right now, the dark side is to technology because it's ripping apart the very fundamentals of our business. And so I think the bigger question is, do you want to become a smarter, more adaptive, intelligent organization? Yes or no? And do you want to help your company do that? Yes or no?
Yeah, and support your customers, whatever that might be for the future, growth, etc. I mean, those are fantastic in terms of the thread that we've come to. But there is one thing that we haven't touched on, and we've spoken about the decisioning piece. We've spoken about some of the human and psychological behavior types that we need to. But what about storytelling?
What about it?
Well, there's a lot about it now. People are coming out saying, organizations need more data storytellers. Organizations need translators. Organizations need, to me, 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 years ago, they were the hybrid business technical people. And now they've just moved on into I'm a translator. Why do we keep repeating the same old labels?
Well, remember, what can you codify? What can be sold? And if you look at most documents that have been put out on data storytelling, whether it be books or articles or white papers or whatever, it's not about story. It's about data visualization.
Right.
Right? Okay, that's the first issue.
Okay.
And second, if people understood how the human brain works and that the human brain doesn't like data, they would not put data into a story. Now, I understand that there are oftentimes in nonprofits or in the financial arena, the compliance arena, regulatory arena, where I have to show different charts and graphs. I'm saying step back from that. What's the human narrative that reveals that? And I'm an idealist here, and can I tell that story before I reveal the data? Because as soon as I reveal the data, I'm going to have arguments. That's where the arguments happen. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to shift people's thinking. But what that means is you better know how to identify an insight. And an insight, and this is where things get convoluted, is people think, oh, look at this data. COVID shows it. Look at this data. Look at these charts. These are the insights. No, they're not the insights.
Yes,
they're
not.
Just a display of the data.
Yes, correct.
If I've got 10 charts, what's the aha? What's the insight? And an insight is not a description of those charts. That is not a story.
No. Yes.
And that's what people are doing. Now, I would suggest to you that because I have to try to play with, when you're shifting mindsets like I am, I have to try to play with the terminology that people are using. I think that the translator role really is someone who facilitates the decisioning process. That's the way I'm positioning it.
Okay.
All right.
But this is a translator, not a data translator. Is this just?
Well, I'm using. I have to use because I have to stay with what people know. Otherwise, it's like I'm introducing another term.
A new concept.
I'm saying to people, So how about we take the term data translator, data interpreter, and we say that what you're really doing is you're working through the decisioning process with people. And that is what that role becomes, rather than me trying to sit there and look at the charts and interpret them to other people, right?
Yes.
Because again, it's a flaw. So I think where folks need to start, in my view, is get a really good handle on how the human brain works. When you get a really good handle on how the human brain works, and that you have to step back and say, well, what really is an insight? What is an insight? And lots of times, I'll tell you something, the data that we collect today gives us zero insights. Don't give us any. Because an insight is an aha. It's something about, oh my gosh, I didn't realize these 5 things go together in this way, and this is what's really causing XYZ to happen. It's like this epiphany that we have.
Yes. And I think it might create the future as well. You know, you might see something.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So
well,
that's going to create that tomorrow or next year or whatever that might be.
Well, we talk about 3 types of insights that you can get out of data. I mean, you can get new knowledge insights, which people oftentimes stop at. You can get insights around taking familiar action. And then you can get insights around future action, which is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Now, I believe that if we go back to the business process, as we're collecting data that helps us to understand our flow of work better and more of our strategic decisions above that, we should be able to pull out all 3 types of insights from that. We don't want to stop at knowledge, which is where most people stop.
No,
look at,
absolutely.
this is something new that it tells us, or it reinforces what we do already. But you're talking about, again, going back full circle, that we can't focus on the data, we have to focus on the decisioning piece of it to be able to see it. But you know what? I think too, people in the belly of organizations, this is my observation, they get this. It's really simple for them to get. It's not like rocket science. They're just like, oh, there's a method to do this. Oh, there's a way to help me do this better. The problem is everybody else around them doesn't get it.
Yeah,
and lives in a different paradigm.
Yeah, I think that the data element is the nullifier. You know, it's the piece where most people get stuck at.
Yes.
And you know, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I can't remember when. You know, I remember bringing something together called a decision map. I called it a decision map because it was like, whoa, this is going to help me make the decisions in the right direction, and maybe help organizations forget about the data and source systems and that kind of stuff, because that stuff is there. I'm not I'm not yeah, absolutely got to get the data together, but it's really about that left not left brain, but the sort of in the chart, the left side of the chart, which is the business propelling decision making view of where they're going. And I remember having conversations with people saying, what is this decision map? Why would I do it? Why are you asking me, what decisions I'm making around my strategic objectives and, what my processes are and so on? Why would you do that? But as soon as I started to use it and people really got into it, they said, wow, I can document this stuff. Right. And then they take it around the organization and show people, say, look at this, we can absolutely, use it in a way that's different to just saying, oh, there's a bit of data and it's visualized now and it looks pretty.
Well, so several months ago, I'm going to add to what you're saying, I got to work with about 16 CEOs for a day. And
great.
I started them out by doing an exercise that just said, tell me your top 3 strategic decisions in your organization that you need to make in the next 30 to 60 to 90 days.
Yep.
That's all we did. That's all we did with
Brilliant.
these 16 CEOs. And then we talked about them. And how would we use a decisioning process to help work through them? And I said, imagine if your entire organization, instead of having dashboards with data on them, had even the decisions that we're trying to make. And then here's the data to support it. But as the decisions got made, the data would shift. One CEO looked at me and he goes, I'm having another epiphany here. And I said, what's that? And he said, my organization doesn't even make strategic decisions in 30, 60, 90 days. It takes us a year.
Wow.
And he said, so I could actually track where we are. If I took your framework, the smarter framework, and I tracked where we are in it, I could show my team, why are we getting why are we getting delayed, or why do we keep looping through the front end of this? You know, and he said, I think it's going to cut our cycle time on making some pretty critical decisions that have to get made.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And I think that becomes the important piece to this as well, is it's how do we do things faster? And I had a question about this yesterday on a webinar. Someone said to me, well, what if you don't have all the data to make the decision? I'm like, that's always going to be the case.
Of course it is.
It always, so then what you say is, how much risk are we willing to take on, and what are all the possible decisions we could make off of this, right? All the alternatives, and which one, depending upon our risk mitigation, do we want to take?
Yeah,
you know, or can we test out a couple?
If we're going to wait for all of the data, then we might as well keep waiting for it and not make any decisions. It's we'll never. It's one step forward and 20 steps back. In that sense.
Well, but let's go further. I think what COVID has allowed people to see, and I've been saying this for years, is why are we creating these data marketplaces? Why are we spending tens of millions of dollars or tens of millions of euros on this stuff? And what COVID taught us is a lot of it's now worthless. And that's, and so you've got to be far more iterative and organic about how you're doing this in organizations. And someone said to me yesterday, but again, if you don't have all the right data, let's say that comes up a series of times, then you might say, oh, maybe that's something we need to start collecting.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you don't do that willy-nilly throughout an organization and say, we're going to take everything and clean it and reposit it, and then draw on it if we need it, because guess what?
I think that's the whole point of absolutely thinking about the decision making and the processes and that whole, as you say, the decision flow. Once you know that, you can start to pinpoint which data you need. And which is going to support it. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, right? Dynamically, of course. I mean, I think that's the whole point, because while, a dashboard, so they say, is dynamic, but it's static at this, it's absolutely static. There's, it needs to be malleable. It needs to be thinking about what the future is going to hold. Unfortunately, I can, ask it to tell me the sales in region X by, particular product. That's great. But really, as you said, the insights I need to gather are going to be far deeper and associated with many different combinations of questions.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think that's sorry, go on.
Well, and I think what we need to bring back to all of this is fundamental statistical understanding. So what I've been seeing a lot of on LinkedIn recently is people saying, well, the data, I looked at it this month compared to last month, this month compared to a year ago. I'm like, where's your run chart? Where's your control chart?
Yeah.
So we don't even understand in the scheme of all of this, if we're going to analyze, we don't understand how to analyze data over time, and that you don't do it in a bar chart and you don't do it by comparisons of numbers. So even more so underpinning this, right, is how we need to shift the sorts of techniques and tools that people in analytics are using and start teaching them the fundamentals and understanding this concept of variability. And what's a special cause and a common cause? Because if you don't understand that, you could take the wrong action again.
You're right, but I think I see it all the time in organizations. There's a reactive movement which needs to absolutely ride on the wave of data because it's the latest and greatest thing. We've got to get the data democratized. We've got to deploy dashboards to the universe, and we've got to say that we've done it.
You're right.
And because we're done, our job is to deliver data. But to me, that's like a tenth of what they should be doing. It's a small fraction. So I think we're in this very strange time, and I think it goes back to what you mentioned earlier. It's driven by a lot of the tech. That's the underlying basis for where and why we're in this state.
Yeah.
And I've been saying it for a long time. It's not about a piece of kit, the shiny new thing that sits on my desk. That is by far the last thing that I want to look at. The first thing I want to do is absolutely understand where the hell I'm going and what I'm going to be doing with this thing. So, and I think for me, summing up, because we're getting to the top of the hour, I've had a fantastic and insightful conversation with you, as always. Where can people catch you? Where can people get a hold of you? Let us know,
Yes. I would say the number one place to find me today is on LinkedIn. So connect to me there. My contact information is available as well. That will also get people on my both on my company page, which is Partners for Progress on LinkedIn,
Sure.
as well as my own page. They'll see lots of our LinkedIn Live videos, podcasts, webinars I've done with other people. But that's the kind of, I think, the central place to start.
That's your marketplace.
That's my marketplace. Yeah, absolutely it is. Well, we're in the process of designing. We're combining a couple of websites together into one.
Great.
And that work with COVID's been delayed, as you can well imagine. So it's like, the number one place to come is come to LinkedIn, and you'll find me there. And you'll find the conversations, right, that you and I are having with other people.
Absolutely. They will be there.
Well.
They will be there. Absolutely. Final points. Where's next? Where's the future for you? Where do you think data decisioning, everything's going? AI, machine learning?
Well, I can only tell you about where I'm going. I will continue to bring forward data literacy 2.0. Might morph in terms of name, I don't know, but that's I have the framework designed for that, and based upon the successes we've had over the years. Second is the decision intelligence piece, and really trying to bring more of that into organizations. For me, 2020 was to be the year of keynoting at conferences all across the world. I was supposed to be in London, right?
Yes.
I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sad. So that's what I'm sitting here going, what do I really want to do for a next step? We've created so much content these last 3 months to give to people freely. I would love to be back on the road, but that's not going to be allowed. So, I've been working virtually, remotely for 33 years. So I'm used to it, and it's just getting clients used to it as well, and being able to do some of the work that we want to get done. So that's where I'm going. But the surprising thing is, I have to be honest with you, that what COVID has done that has been just it kind of made me curious, is that it's kind of been like a resurgence of business storytelling.
Okay, and that's great to hear.
I think for connectivity, and people really desire it and want it. So I'm getting a tremendous number of requests on that. And then, for me, it's taking this conversation, trying to get people in COVID to do the following thing. And I talk about this from a strategic thinking perspective. We're so focused on I talk about, using McKinsey's terms, the next normal. We're so focused on the now and the next step. And I keep telling people, you better focus on the step after next that's out here. You better stand in the future and use foresight data.
Agreed.
So what's not happened in anything that we've talked about today is, what's the use of foresight data, not forecasted data, in the decisioning process. That could be a whole show on its own, I think.
It could be.
But that is where I'm really focused as well, is how do we start to bring that to the forefront as I continue to do my strategy work.
Sure. Well, look, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
And I've really enjoyed our chat, and I look forward to getting this out there, and to listening into more conversations and LinkedIn Live with Lori, and all of the posts, and so yes, good luck with it all. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for a delightful hour.
No, it's been wonderful.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care.